This is so rad. In a spot as legendary as San Francisco's China Banks, here at this back section where in the 80s people like Tommy Guerrero and Mike Archimedes and Mickey Reyes used to skate this little section like a little half pipe and do airs over the channel. Here you have someone who's actually had the gumption to wax the top ledge of this banked ledge here. I haven't seen any tricks go down on it, but you can see that there are grind and slide marks. Something amazing is about to happen here because this is one of the most amazing skate spots in the world, San Francisco's China Banks. The China Banks is a 210-foot-long pedestrian bridge that links Portsmouth Square on one side of Kearny Street to the Chinatown Hilton and Chinese Cultural Center on the 3rd floor of this brutalist building, originally designed in 1971 by the architect Clement Chen and John Carl Warnke and Associates. And John Carl Warnke actually designed a lot of famous skate spots. You know that AT&T Long Lines building in New York City, that big pink brutalist building with no windows whatsoever? That's a Warnke building. Clement Chen was a Chinese architect who was called in to design this ultra modern hotel in the heart of one of the oldest and most densely populated ethnic neighborhoods in the country, San Francisco's Chinatown. So there's the great opening scene of Dirty Harry, where there's a sniper atop 555 California, the Bank of America Tower, or BlackRock, and he ends up shooting someone swimming in the most depressing pool imaginable at the top of this brutalist building. And the same year that that movie came out, 1971, was when Lawrence Halprin and Armand Valancourt designed Embarcadero Plaza. It's when the Brooklyn Banks is being first built, and it's when China Banks is also being constructed. 1971, all these epic spots are all built in the exact same era. Trip on that. Portsmouth Square gets its name from the US naval ship that was anchored by Captain Montgomery, who would eventually seize control of Yerba Buena, turning it into an American city by 1848. Because so much of San Francisco's waterfront was pushed into the San Francisco Bay, the original outline of the peninsula, like where Captain Montgomery hit land, was at Montgomery Street. So we're at Kearny Street. We're at one city block from the original shoreline of San Francisco, which basically means that everything that's east of us is built on landfill. That means that 1971 Lawrence Halprin's Embarcadero Plaza, Pier 7, Bay Blocks, where Hubba Hideout was, all landfill. So even though in 1850 the first mayor of San Francisco welcomed Chinese immigrants to the fledgling city, those same descendants of those first Chinese settlers in San Francisco faced exploitation and exclusion for the next century. Between 1888 and 1943, there was actually a Chinese Exclusion Act which prevented more Chinese immigrants from arriving in the United States. And this new generation of Chinese Americans identified less with the touristy views of Chinatown that you might associate up the hill, and more with this idea of prosperity and modernism as this way of asserting one's global identity. In a lot of ways, that's embodied by this bridge and this building. This brutalist hotel doesn't look like anything else in the neighborhood. It doesn't even look like anything else in the city. You have these board form slabs puckered to show the sort of process of construction. And the bridge itself is radically modern. And really the only place you see any instance of traditional Chinese design are in these cuboctahedron palace lanterns out of iron at each little section of the bridge, and this kind of cheesy pagoda-like entrance that separates the bridge from Portsmouth Square. And these little concrete pedestals for the palace lanterns create these channels at each section of the banks. And you can totally get why in the mid to late 1980s, everyone who visited China banks would want to do some kind of channel ollie over this little concrete section. Channel ollieing was the shit in the 80s. But little by little, beginning after the Second World War, Chinatown modernized. In 1951, you had the first housing projects being built in Chinatown. A community center was built right after that. And remember, the 1958 Embarcadero Freeway brought people from down south, from San Jose, Palo Alto, and the rest of the peninsula, straight to Chinatown. Those two off-ramps were Washington and Clay Street, which basically go on either side of Portsmouth Square directly into Chinatown. In 1962, Portsmouth Square is redesigned by Robert Royston, the same guy who designed the Cardiel no-slides at St. Mary's Square. And that redesign includes a subterranean parking garage to accommodate the many visitors to San Francisco's Chinatown. So all this means that within a span of about 15 years, Chinatown undergoes a significant period of modernization, and that's reflected in the design of this bridge itself. And as the story goes, as you all should know, this spot was discovered by Mike Archimedes, who grew up not far from here on the corner of Bush and Powell in 1979. The appeal of this spot would be the kind of surf-like carving that you could do on these brick and concrete waves. And it makes a lot of sense that this would be a popular spot for skateboarding in the late 80s, because remember, boards had no noses. So on one section, closer to the Chinese Cultural Center, you would have these little banks that face each other, and you could kind of skate it like a ditch or a half pipe. But as you got farther away from that building, you also started to see sessions go down on the lips at the very end of the bridge towards Portsmouth Square. And they skate it in Animal Chin. You see people carving the benches in Sick Boys. You see Nodis and Gons ripping this thing in the late 80s. In other words, this spot gains its prominence not simply because of the local skaters who skated here daily, but also because the most innovative and popular street skaters at the end of the 80s always made China banks a destination whenever they were coming to San Francisco. And yeah, sure, I know that other cities boast harsh skate spots, but that is the fundamental quality of all skate spots in San Francisco. And in a lot of ways, China banks is the consummate example of a spot that is 1,000 times more challenging to skate in person than it looks on video. When you see how naturally and easily people are carving over these benches in the 80s, what you don't realize is that these banks are really steep, and those transitions are almost non-existent. That curve is made up of 4 tiny bricks that barely make it up to the steep face of these banks. And one of the most insane things is this patina on the top row of bricks at this section of the banks. I mean, this is probably like where most people, if they make it to the lip, this is where they end up. And this is also, crazily, where people start grinding this top ledge. And first it's John Cardiel pushing through the park uphill to get on the highest part of this ledge. It's not just that getting up on this ledge at any part of China Banks is difficult. This happens to be the part where it's at least 4 inches higher than anywhere else. Then it's Phil Shaw's Smith grind, his tail slide to fakie. Tim McKenney's lip slide, his nose pick. Dandra Hobel's board slide over one of the benches. That gap between the top of the ledge and the beginning of the bank is pretty much centimeters away from being a full wheelbase between your trucks. 5-0. And that's just one of many tricks that's been done on this ledge, from Pat Duffy's backside tailslide to more recently Jeff Carlisle's frontside nose grind and Smith grind over the bench. One of my favorite things that's been done was T4's backside lip slide over one of the benches on top of the ledge. So if you come here, you will realize that China Banks is basically a bridge that's an A-frame, a very mellow A-frame. The bridge was designed by the artist and architect Chen Chi Kwan. And the bench pattern goes dot dash, long, short, the entire span of this 210-foot long bridge. So beginning with Julian Stranger's backside carve over the long bench, and Eli Reed's switch backside carve over the long bench, and T-Funk's frontside ollie, which was so epic that it made the cover a couple of years ago, each of those skaters pushed their ass off going uphill before they could possibly get enough speed to make it over this bench. My friends and I used to scream, just like Cardiel after Julian carved this bench. So every time I see this bench, I hear John Cardiel's screech in my ear. And this is the kind of spot that's so hard to skate that it requires its own special skill set to skate it. And consider the way that Busenitz has explored the inside of this Miesian concrete slab bench. You can't learn that anywhere else. That has to be learned here. And I think it's so sick that Rob Welsh had that like 5-0 grind to fakie on this part of the China Banks here. You know, it's like, in spite of his impeccable tech credentials, he's still proving to the world that he grew up in the same state as Dan Drehobel. And speaking of Dan Drehobel, of course, like, you know, by the mid-90s, his Think Part skating China Banks was so influential because like, this was this moment when skateboarding was moving out of its finicky tech influence, and you had this new generation of all-terrain vehicle skaters who could skate any and everything in an original way. And so, you know, by the time someone like Paul Shire is filming a video part in San Francisco, he's skating China Banks. Not only is he kick flipping into the bank, but he's also doing a nose grind backside 180 on one of the benches. Come here if you want to see how challenging that was. So as we're standing above Kearny Street on this bridge and we're looking north up Kearny Street, the top of the street is Frank's Hill Bomb. And just to the left here is Pat Duffy's insane gap ollie from the top of Portsmouth Square to the sidewalk at Kearny Street. And more recently, Miles Silvis just kickflipped that gap. God damn. And speaking of Frank Gerwer, Gerwer was also the first person to ollie that rail into this bank, thus setting off a whole new set of challenges and obstacles at this already legendary spot. And when that bottom rail is sawed off, as it currently is, people are doing tricks into this mosaic titled Sunrise from 2016 by the artist Mick Gaspey. And the title Sunrise relates to the fact that you used to be able to watch the sun rise above the bay from Portsmouth Square before all of these skyscrapers were built on landfill. China Banks is truly one of the 7 wonders of the skateboard world, and sadly, like Embarcadero Plaza, it's probably going to be demolished. I spent a lot of time on this show talking about architects and artists, Clement Chen, Chen Shi Quan, John Carl Warnecke, but it's really the skateboarders who shaped this place. It's what we do here that gives this place life. And that's the most amazing thing about skateboarding in general and skateboarding in San Francisco in particular. In the midst of this concrete jungle, you have skateboarders figuring out how to play in the most harsh circumstances imaginable. These are steep banks and rough concrete, and somehow it's these surfaces that inspire us the most.
Thank you.
That made my day.
Look at you go! Legendary China Bank shit from the skull, baby!